Between the 23rd and 26th of May 2019, I was a guest of the Austrian Wine Marketing Board at their Wine Summit program, which takes place every 2 years. What follows in this series is in-depth coverage of the journey along the Danube stream of the summit. This features a mixture of presentations from members of the Austrian Wine Marketing Board and a combination of presentations and tours of participating wineries. If you've ever wanted to increase your knowledge of Austrian wine, this is the place to be. And do be sure to subscribe to the podcast at interpretingwine.com/listen so that you're alerted when new episodes go live. Today's episode of the Austrian Wine Summit Series features a Thermenregion Masterclass with two winemakers from the region, Bernhard Stadlmann and Heinrich Hartl. Bernhard kicks things off, giving us a regional overview before talking statistics and climate, geology, wine classification and sugar levels, before then taking us through two flights, one of Rotgipfler and the second of Zierfandler. Heinrich then takes over with the discussion of the two red flights, the Pinot Noir and the Saint Laurent. At various times in the masterclass, there are questions from the floor that the mic doesn't always pick up so well, which I've left in for context if you can hear them. And even if you can't hear the questions, it should become quite obvious from the response what the question was, as I think these questions and answers give a lot of context to this masterclass, which, as Bernhard said in his part, contains information that's not regularly seen in textbooks on Austria, and is a real treat for anyone wanting to better know these lesser-known grape varieties. Enjoy!
Good morning, everybody. I've got a pleasure to welcome you here all together in the Thermenregion, the region, the wine-growing region. On behalf of all the winemakers in this region, myself, I'm a winemaker. My name is Bernhard Stadlmann. And I'll give you some detailed information about this region and about our wines, a little bit about the history as well as the climate and the geology and the soil types of our region. I'm together with my colleague, and he's also a very skilled and experienced winemaker from the region, Heinrich Hartl. He will focus on the red wines, while I will gonna talk a little bit more in detail about the white wines from our region. And it's great to have you all in here. As I've heard before, there's about half of you have already been to Austria, visited Austria. I'm not sure if you have visited wine countries, wine regions in Austria, but we're very close to Vienna, as you could experience when you came in here. And it's really a good starting point, really. I think this session might be the most important part of your trip through all these wine countries or wine regions in Austria. And this is because we are a small wine-growing region, and in many books you will not read a lot about this region, even though this region is so important for the Austrian wine culture in history and in future, that you really should know about this region in more detail. And I think you're all here in Austria to become an expert in Austrian wines. And if you know more about this region, you'll definitely differentiate yourself from other wine people who know about Austria, but you'll know all the details afterwards. So welcome to our region. It's a very old wine-growing country. It dates back to Roman times, so about 2,000 years ago. Roman settlers have already brought their own grapevines with them to this region, but there were also already people from the Celt who were kind of growing vines in this region. But Romans really brought the new kind of experience of how to cultivate in a more vines in a more professional way. After that, there was a time span of the Middle Ages where there was a lot of peoples commuting and crossing Europe, and we don't know much about wine growing at that time. But we have a kind of a restarting point of Austrian wine culture, modern wine culture as we understand today, which we in our region, and maybe you can say that for Austria, started 1141 with Cistercian monks who came to our region, who were giving land to build a new monastery, which is just behind the hills here. The monastery of Heiligenkreuz is Cistercian monks, and they came to this region and they felt very familiar. They came directly from Burgundy, from the Abbey of Citeaux, who were running Clos Vougeot at that time already. And when they came to this region to build a new monastery, they found very familiar with the landscape and the soil types and the climate. So they started to replant grapevines in this region. So we have a long connection and tradition with Burgundian varieties, which we're gonna talk more about later on. So this was kind of the restarting point as we understand wine growing in Austria and in this region. I'll just want to show you and to give you kind of a picture where we are located. So what we can say where the Thermenregion is based on, it's the calcareous Alps. They've been built in Trias time, and it's the ground, the foundation is main Dolomite. This is the very eastern end of the Alpine areas. So when you look outside, you will see the Viennese woods, and these are the very eastern end of the Alpine area. So we are part of the northern limestone Alps. If you look into further east, this way, you would look towards Hungarian border, where there's the Burgenland in between. There's another hill formation built on limestone, but it's a different type of limestone this was built on. This is part of the Carpathian rocks or hills. So just giving you an idea that we are, the very eastern end of the Alpine area. However, a lot of soil descriptions and the development of the soil is based on seashell limestone that it was formed in the Neogene during the Parathesis times, when this area was flooded by sea, by an ocean, for a long time. So we have different levels of this development and different seashells from different times on which our soil was further developed. So on this soil, we found clay that's been developed in more finely texture or more coarse. We find marl in our area, but we also found colluvium, which has been brought into this region from the Alpine area with the glaciers and the rivers in the more southern and eastern part of our region. We consider ourselves a continental climate, which was already explained, for all Austrian, the big picture. So we are kind of on this edge, on this border between the Pannonian climate, which comes from the east, brings in some warm and dry sunny days and long dry autumns. But since we're so close to the Alpine area, we do get an influence by cold wind that comes in the evenings. So we have a strong difference in temperature during the days. To give you an idea, we are here located between 200 and 400 meter above sea level. We have a rather dry climate, so we do experience about 600 millimeter or liter precipitation per year. And the total surface of vineyards in our region is around 2,200 hectares of vineyards. So all these figures and all these data look a little similar to Burgundy, as I explained before. And this is also what, again, the Cistercian monks, when they arrived, felt familiar with. So this, again, gives you a picture of Austria. We were told this is all Alpine area on the western part. And within the eastern part, we are located just south of Vienna. So we're still within the generic wine growing region of Niederösterreich or Lower Austria, where you also find the Weinviertel, the Wagram, the Carnuntum, Kremstal, Wachau. We're just south of Vienna. And if we look further east, then you would already cross into the wine growing country of the Burgenland. So this is our region in more detail. As you can see, we are right bordering on the city of Vienna. That's where the vineyards already start to be planted. And it goes all the way down to the city of Wiener Neustadt, which is another major city. However, you can see most vineyards are planted around the town of Gumpoldskirchen, where we are today, which is on the north here, a little bit further, and going down here around the towns of Soos and Tattendorf. So this is probably the major wine growing areas within our region. This again gives you a kind of what I was explaining before, a picture for that. So all this part is part of the calcareous northern alpine area. So you can see we're located right on the end of this. And you can see we are the only wine region that is built on this kind of base rock. Again, these are the calcareous alpine area, and you can see we do have some kind of shifts in the geology, where a thermal fault line that goes through our area, and we have no volcanic soil at all. It's just kind of these kind of parts just sunk in and broke. However, this area is named after the thermal fault line, the Thermenregion, the Thermenregion, since you will find natural hot springs along this line. And in our area, for example, Baden, Bad Vöslau, these are towns that you still can go there to the hot springs, and they were already used by Roman times. So, but having showing you these kind of shifts, this will also tell you that there is a difference between the western part, and if you go further east, you'll have some changes. So this is like the primer rock, and then you have like the seashell sediments that will follow toward if you go further east. And this will show you roughly about this kind of level the soils. So here you have the solid rock, and on top you have some brown soil that has been developed. If you go further, you will already get some kind of broken material and seashells mixed in. And as further you go towards the east, you'll get more of this richer type of soil with more clay involved. If you go further east, you'll get again back to a more shallow soil, which is more gravelly involved. As I said, it's more like colluvial soil with pebbles, and a more or a lighter type of soil again. Again, this can kind of remind you of the situation in Burgundy. This is just information about the climate. So you can see that on average we have 600 millimeters of rainfall a year, and this is quite important, this part. So during the season of ripening the grapes, we do get less rainfall into the late autumn. So this helps us to grow grapes that need a little longer to ripen, and I will talk about these specific grapes later on. And I think I missed a little part about the history. As I said, we started off with the Romans and afterwards with Cistercian monks, 1141. And then we had this time of the royal Europe or the aristocracy, and that really kind of was driving the Austrian wine production and all over the Austrian wine country. However, wines from specific region got some very highly rated products that were sold all over Europe and even further, like wines from our region. At that time, between the 17th and 19th century, some of the most important wine and most prestigious wines from the Austrian-Hungarian Empire were at that time coming from the Tokai area. At that time it was Austrian. Sweet wines made from the Rust area, which is in the Burgenland, and wines coming from our region, the rich and dry white wines from our region were already sold throughout Europe to other royal courts, towards Russia, to the Tsar of Russia, to the kings and queens of the United Kingdom, but as well as to the king of Brazil, for example. So these wines were shipped and transported at that time already, almost around the world. Having said that, these wines, and we'll talk about that again when we get more detail to the varietals and the characteristics of the wines, were already stable enough to ship these wines for longer distances. At that time it was important to have either high sugar concentration, high acidity like the wines from the Mosel, high alcohol content. So all these traditional famous wine growing region had some sort of a quality that makes it able to ship wines. And there was one famous winemaker at that time around the 19th century, mid of 19th century, Mr. Schlumberger. He's famous today for producing sparkle wines, or at least the company. But he started his vineyards and his wine production in our area, and he was proud to show the people that the wines from our region tasted still very well and actually improved by shipping cases of wines around the world on sailing ships at that time. So he could prove that these wines are very stable and very valuable. Around that time, 1855, white wines from our area get awarded very prestigiously in the famous World Trade Exhibition in Paris in 1855, when the famous Bordeaux classification came out during the time of Napoleon III. The white wine golden medal was awarded to a wine trader, winemaker from our region, with white wine from our region. So just giving you an idea how important these wines were for the Austrian wine culture and the further developments. So I already said that our wines got exported at an early stage already, but even after World War II, wines from our region were some of the first wines that got sold and traded to the United States. And we're looking into a very bright future by focusing on these specific grape varietals that we're going to talk in more detail now. All right. And I think we can start with the first grape varietal. And you're going to get poured 4 wines of this grape varietal. And while we're talk about this grape varietal. The key white wines from our areas are the traditional grape varietals of Rotgipfler, which is a autochthonous grape variety, a white wine grape varietal, even though the name Rot in German refers to red. But I will explain the confusion in more detail. We also have a grape that is called Zierfandler, which is also an autochthonous grape varietal. And they're not directly mutations of other grape varietals. They are grape varietals on their own. As I explained in the beginning, we also have a long tradition and connection to Burgundy. So these people brought their own grapes with them, which were the Pinot Blanc and the Chardonnay grapes. So you'll find these grapes in our region as well as the Grüne Veltliner, which is the also widely planted grape in our region, as you'll find in all other regions within the Niederösterreich or the Lower Austrian area. Rotgipfler sounds kind of exotic to a lot of people who started to get interested in Austrian wines, but even like some experts have not even come across these grape varietals. The reason might be that there's only little planted of these grape varietals. However, as I said, I think it's really important to know about these grape varietals, since they have such a strong identity and such a strong connection to our wine country. Rotgipfler is one of these two white wine grape varietals that you will find exclusively grown in our region. So even if you go into other areas within Austria, you will hardly find this grape varietal. There might be some vines planted in other areas. However, they're not produced as single varietal wines as we do it in our area. So the origin of Rotgipfler is said to be, and research says it's a kind of Traminer or Traminer-like grape varietal that was crossed with Roter Veltliner, and this must have happened in the fields because there's no books that can kind of found that somebody deliberately made this kind of crossing. So why is this called Rotgipfler, where Rot again refers to red? As you can see, there's no red color on the grapes, neither there is red color in your glass. But it's the shoot tips of this grape. Around this time of the year, you will see they're kind of red, almost pink colored. This is how you can really identify this grape already in the vineyard in springtime. And Rotgipfler should not be confused with Weißgipfler. Weißgipfler is the original name for Grüne Veltliner, or the synonym for Grüne Veltliner. And Weißgipfler or Grüne Veltliner shows the young shoots, the young tips, the leaves, the tiny leaves in the beginning of the year, kind of woolen white colored. So this is how the people some 100 years ago kind of gave names to the grape varietals. This grape varietal really thrives on medium to richer type of soil. So within our area, where you plant Rotgipfler, you're looking for some vineyards where you have a higher content of clay involved. And the grape itself is a medium late ripening grape varietal, so it gets harvested beginning of October, around that time. And it gives wines a quite rich, extract, quite a good level of concentration, and always with a good level of acidity. And I think what is quite typical to these wines, also kind of a dark, spicy flavor. But let's taste the wines in your glass. All right, so we do have 4 different wines from this grape varietal in your glass. So this kind of represent a level of wines that we can call traditional to this region. So the wines made from this Rotgipfler variety will always come with a certain level of richness. There will be wines on the market, or there are wines on the market that probably are starting from 12.5% alcohol, but hardly any wines below that. Why is that? You do need a certain level of ripeness in the grapes to get the expression of the grape varietal, really. If we were harvesting earlier than that, you'll get a rather neutral or less intense wines. And that's what we're looking for traditionally in our region, producing wines that have a nice balance of some good richness, some good concentration, but also a good balance with a fine acidity level. So all these wines are grown on limestone, which is no surprise. As I said, all our geology is based, or all our soils are based on limestone, which is very different to other areas you're gonna visit, where they have different types of geological formations. But within our region, we differentiate very clearly appellations or crus or wines from single villages. And how is that? Again, there's some similarity to Burgundy when we talk about differentiating vineyards or crus. We see differences in the content of clay and the water holding capacity. That really differentiates the vineyards from each other. Of course, there are some vineyards that are more eastern exposed rather than southern exposed. But since we have not such very steep hillsides where we grow the vines on, the primary factor is driving the differences is the content of clay in our soil. So I'll just let you taste the wines, and I'll give you some information maybe, or I missed to say that if you do have any questions, please just stop me, and I really want to make sure that it's clear what I was trying to tell you.
How can the grapes be crossed in the vineyards if it's not purposely done?
That's what said. Yeah, I mean you do have some wind events. I mean people were. We know that the deliberately crossing was done by human when the Cabernet Sauvignon was kind of started to arrive, because the Cabernet Franc and the Sauvignon Blanc are blooming at a very different time, so that could never probably happen out there in the fields. But since there was no one who said or was could not find in the books that somebody really made this kind of experiments. So research said that it was a crossing out there in the field, really. You were already introduced to the term of Ried, which is the term, or when you see that on the label, the term Ried, then it always refers that this wine comes from a single vineyard. And after the word Ried, you will find the name of the vineyard. So like these wines here on the list, Rotgipfler, that's obviously the grape varietal. Then you'll find Ried, the indication for this comes from a single vineyard, and the vineyard is named Wiege. So Rotgipfler refers to the young leaves in springtime. They're reddish in color. And during the year, the leaves are dark in color, and the veins of the leaves are red colored as well. And in former times, people they did not know about the DNA and what was the crossing and the relation of the grapes, of the varietals to each other. So they were naming the grapes after their appearance, for example. And this happened to Rotgipfler as well as Weißgipfler, Grüner Veltliner, or as we call it, the Pinot Blanc or the Weißer Burgunder. It's a white wine grape coming from Burgundy. Here it's a reference to where it comes from. So in former times, grape names were given to some relations people could find, either how the appearance in the vineyard or about the origins, what they know these wines were coming from. Yeah. So I think the expression of Rotgipfler is kind of a full, ripe flavor, but not overwhelming. It's always kind of a nice balance. It's definitely going into kind of a spicy, almost tropical flavors, but not kind of in a sweet way. Some people see some kind of sweet texture in the wines, but it's not based on actually the residual sugar in the wines. It's the ripening of the grapes that really brings kind of a rich expression of ripe fruit. I don't want to give too many flavors. I don't know, during wine tastings when you come up with some certain flavors, everybody kind of has his own experience. But it's definitely kind of a wine that's got a a creamy and rich kind of texture. And these wines are traditionally meant to drink when they are been aged on the bottle for a little while. So we always kind of recommend that these wines you should give at least 1-2 years time on the bottle and then start drinking, because these wines really take a little time to open up. But I think vintage is 2017, 16, but even 18, which was an early vintage, are showing quite well already. And I think that's some very good examples. And the traditional wine production method in our region is using large wood barrels, filling about between 600 and 2,000 liter. Some winemakers experiment with small barrels as well, with giving some toasting to the wines. However, it's very gently used, but I think the majority of the wines are produced in large wood barrels in our region. When we talk about wood barrels in Austria, we always refer to neutral in taste. So, and they are thick staves. The wood is rather thick, and we are not looking for oxidation by using these wood barrels. It's just using the structure of the wood for a kind of sedimentation and élevage during the ripening, maturing grapes, the wine in the barrels. And the producers in our region are also not afraid of having a little bit of tannin in white wines. You will see that in our wines. So because this kind of phenols, when they are ripened, they will help, to give the wine stability. And that's where I want to refer back to when I said in history these wines were already at that time. People really appreciated drinking these wines around the world, because this kind of qualities gave the wine stability for longer traveling as well.
Usually doing a small amount of skin maceration, if so, how
long?
3 hours.
Yeah, I mean, some producers use skin maceration, as Hannes Reinisch just said, that he's using some parts of 20% with a little bit of skin maceration, so giving a little bit of more tannins, and I think you can feel that in the wine already. However, I think, again, the winemakers in our region are not afraid of pressing a little harder, because we are confident that we harvest grapes that are ripe enough to get the tannins in the wines. So it's not necessarily always the kind of the maceration on the skin, but using ripe berries or ripe grapes with a little harder pressing. Right. When we talk about Rotgipfler compared to the Zierfandler, I'm going to speak in a minute about, they behave very differently to not only the soil, but also to the vintages. So the Rotgipfler is probably more driven by humidity during the year, more than compared to the Zierfandler, which is more driven by temperature and sunshine during the vintages. But for example, if we think about very warm vintages like 2018, 2017 we had, we also have to say it was dry, it was warm and dry, which makes a huge difference if we talk about warm and humid vintages. For example, Rotgipfler, when it's very warm and dry, it kind of keeps acidity much stronger. So there's less respiration of acidity during the ripening. So some people get afraid when they think about warm and dry vintages, but not for us with the Rotgipfler. It can hold acidity very well. So reserve, it's a term in the Austrian wine law that you can use for wines that are, I think, above 13% alcohol. And they're allowed to be released after May 1st, after a year of harvest. So this is a term that's written in the wine law. The term top selection, it's chosen by the producer, and I think he's choosing this according to older wines in this specific vineyard. some producers are looking for malolactic fermentations, but no one really forces into malolactic fermentation. So you'll find, I guess, most wines without malolactic fermentation, but there's going to be a good proportion of some malolactic fermentation. I think if you look specifically into Rotgipfler, you should hardly find a difference whether there was malolactic fermentation or there was no malolactic fermentation, because the wines the berries get picked rather ripe, and you have very little acidic levels of malic acidic. So you have, just a very tiny malolactic fermentation going on, and you will hardly feel kind of a strong difference between malolactic fermentation and a bit like Pinot Gris and Traminer, where you can hardly find differences whether there was or whether there was no malolactic fermentation. But it's a tricky grape varietal or wine because due to its kind of this kind of dark, spicy flavors that sometimes go into kind of this cardamom type of aroma. Some people, or vanilla, some people get immediately reminded of this might be coming from a barrique or pièce that's been toasted, but it is not necessarily that. In many cases, it's really like the concentration, the ripeness of the fruit that we know from Pinot Gris, Traminer, Viognier, that get this kind of dark spices at this level of ripeness. You'll find Rotgipfler on a more higher level of alcohol. So in most cases, it's around 13.5% alcohol. Some wines you will start with the alcohol of 12.5, but you have to be careful if you go into even higher ripeness of, let's say, 14% alcohol, because then you'll lose acidity and the wine gets really big. So, but it tends to be higher alcohol. Yeah. It's related to the picking time, and if you were picked too early, the wines would not get the expression of the traditional character. If we were picking at the alcohol level of 11, the wines would be not as traditional in the characteristics, really. In Austria, you consider your wines dry up to 9 gram residual sugar if you have high acidity as well. So everything about up to 4 gram residual sugar is always dry, and if you go above 4 gram residual sugar, it's still dry considered. So if you have like, for example, 6 gram residual sugar and you have 4 acidity, you're still dry. If you go 7, considered dry on the label in Austria. If you go on 7 gram residual sugar, you need to have 5 gram acidity. So there must be a difference of 2. So you can go even up to 9 gram residual sugar. If you have 7 gram residual acidity, it's still labeled dry in Austria. Yeah. So anything above 9, even your acidity is really high, you go into medium dry or off dry. And then there's a next step, I think it's 12 or 13 gram residual sugar. You consider it's called, or 18, it's called lieblich, which is lovely translated. And everything above 24, I think.
45.
45, it's sweet. So this is the other kind of key grape varietal or traditional grape varietal in our region, and it's named Zierfandler. So it's not the same as Zinfandel. It's definitely different, as you can see already in your glass. But also the grape varietal is the grapevine and behaves very differently. So this is Zierfandler or Roter Zierfandler, and this is because the grapes tend to change color towards a reddish coloring, like Traminer, for example, some variations of Traminer. So here again we have origin. It's related to Roter Veltliner, which is another old Austrian grape varietal, and it behaves very differently to the Rotgipfler in the vineyards and as a wine. It's a very late ripening grape varietal. It's ripening around the time when we would harvest Riesling as well. it's very stable in acidity, where I said the Rotgipfler, when you get into a higher ripeness, you have more kind of medium or lower level of acidity, like Grüne Veltliner, for example. This grape varietal, again, in that respect, behaves similar to Riesling. But it's totally different in its genetics, and and it prefers to be grown on shallow soil. Again, this is very different to the Rotgipfler, which I said prefers to be grown on more richer type of soil in our region, higher contents of clay. It needs a little bit more water to really thrive, whereas the Zierfandler has no problems with more drier situation. So it's actually best to grow on more shallow clay soils. So Zierfandler you'll find them more on the, roughly speaking, on the higher parts of the hills where you have more shallow soil. When you come down the hillside, there's more deeper, more richer soils. Then you will find more Rotgipfler planted. But this can change within specific locations. You'll find also some vineyards on the top of the hill where there's Rotgipfler grown. There's some special locations where you have more clay in the soil. So Zierfandler behaves very differently in the vineyard. It really grows very straight up. It brings very little fruit. Rotgipfler, in some vintages, you need to kind of control the fruit level, like Grüne Veltliner again, some similarities there. Zierfandler brings less fruit by nature. It ripens very late, so it's you will not find this grape grown in other wine growing areas in our region in Austria again, since some places along the Danube, if you go further west, this grape would not get ripe enough on a continuous base. At the same time, if you go further east into more warmer areas, this grape varietal has a very thin grape skin, and you can end up kind of getting raisins after some ripening, because you would lose water during ripening later on. So this is really like the reason why this grape varietal is kind of stuck in our region. It's said to be native to our region, and the wines themselves, again, they do tend to have a certain level of alcohol, again starting around 12.5% alcohol, but on the palate they feel much leaner, much more focused compared to the richness of the Rotgipfler. Where the Rotgipfler, I think we could experience kind of this warm character of this of these wines. The Zierfandler tends to be more kind of a colder expression of a wine, the fruit expressions, and the spices are a little bit more floral compared to the kind of darker spices from the Rotgipfler. So again, we do have four wines in a glass, all coming from the Zierfandler varietal. And again, on this grape varietal, producers are not afraid, even the expression of the more dynamic acidity and slightly higher levels of acidity. Even in these wines, producers are not too much afraid of having a little bit of tannins in there as well, which is a challenge. At some point, you have to be very careful, because if you do have a higher acidity, you have to be careful if you go into a higher levels of tannin as well, because this kind of can fight on your palate really.
It's quite a mouthful with the acidity. It's pretty strong, right?
Yeah, I mean acidity levels. I think most of them are written in your catalog, but they tend to be about one gram total acidity above the level of Rotgipfler, which doesn't sound a lot different, but in the whole concept and the whole texture of the wine, it just comes across more dynamic, more forward,
So the origin is for both grapes?
It seems very similar, but If we think of Chardonnay, it's also based on Traminer, so you can get very different grapes out of it. But this is what research tells us, that these grapes are probably not built on the same Traminer varietal, but Rotgipfler was involved in both of them. Yeah. But since they behave so differently in the vineyards and as a wine, and there definitely are two different grape varietals. Yeah. And here, with this grape varietal, producers tend to use, again, large wood barrels in the vinification, or stainless steel tank, a little more, less so small wood barrels, where the Rotgipfler tends to be, some producers use a little bit more of small wood barrels. Zierfandler, you'll find hardly any producers that use small wood barrels for Zierfandler. Yeah. And again, in most of Zierfandlers, you do not find malolactic fermentation, which hardly occurs naturally because you do have a low pH level due to the higher acidity, and that does not offer, natural malolactic fermentation easily. So you would have to inoculate, and if you are looking for that, really. So Zierfandler always brings this. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Can I ask you? Because some of these are single vineyards. How much of the aroma that we are tasting now is because of the terroir and not because of grape varietals? Because we've tried. The first station 14 and now 14. They all taste quite different, and from the same grape varietals, and they all single vineyards. So can you tell me it's all because of the vineyard, or is it because of the grape?
Yeah.
We are tasting different.
Sure. Yeah.
Different aromas.
Yeah. This is, I would consider Zierfandler and Rotgipfler a slightly aromatic grape varietal. It's definitely not like a Riesling or Traminer, so you do not have the very strong focus on very specific flavors from the grape itself. So the part of the grape varietal, the character of the grape varietal is probably not as prominent as you would have Riesling from different, or Traminer from different crus. So you do have more variation with these grape varietals if they come from a different cru. And Zierfandler really reacts to how much clay and how much water holding capacity you have in your vineyard. And even if there is minor variations between the vineyards, you can see quite a difference in the wines already. So this might give you the impression of quite strong variation between the vineyards, really. Yeah.
I have a question for the first one.
Yeah.
It got really significant smell of Saki East yogurt. So is it a natural one?
The first one.
Yes.
Do you mean some yogurt, like some malolactic fermentation, or?
Some like unfermented or still developing yeast and really Saki texture.
Okay. I'm afraid the producer is not with us, but it's a young wine. It's a 2017 wine, so you might have still quite some influence from the yeast, it's still developing. And Zierfandler, when it's a young wine, it's still kind of trying to find its way during fermentation. So the first and second year, there's still a lot of development going on in the wine. And this wine probably was fermented in steel tank. Yeah. So the producer might have left it for a little longer on the yeast. So this combination of using steel tank and a longer surlis or bâtonnage even, then you might have a stronger influence of this kind of yeasty texture and flavors. Yeah. The second wine was also produced in stainless steel tank, but it's a single vineyard, and the single vineyard wines tend to be more richer, harvested a little later. So the first one is Village, basically, from the town of Gumpolskirchen, so more vineyards coming together, and they tend to be harvested a little earlier. So even though I'm using a similar method of production, you might end up with a more clearer or different wine here. But it's definitely also the level of ripeness that is making a difference here in these first two wines.
Second one was aged on lees or not?
Not as much as the first one. I know the producer is using stainless steel tank, and I think he does go into clearing his wine a little earlier. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the two, number 3 and 4, the wines, they were produced in wood barrels, so wooden casks. Yeah. Whereas the wine from the last one comes from a vineyard that is more richer in soil, a little bit more clay, compared to the third wine, which is kind of medium to shallow rich soil compared to each other. So again, I mean, some people trying to find similarities to grapes from somewhere else or wines from somewhere else in the world. These wines sometimes tend to get references to varietals or wines with a higher acidity level and some kind of richer texture. I don't know what comes up to your mind, but sometimes the texture, not the flavors, but the textures might be similar to Rieslings from Alsace, kind of richness, but the acidity there as well. And some people think flavors, they can find similarities to Chenin Blanc, kind of these honey floral flavors. But again, these are just some very rough experiences, comparisons. All right. Okay, so I do hope I could give you some good information on these two grape varietals. That are, again, you'll sometimes, even in some textbooks, you will hardly find this detailed information. And please make sure some people and some books write Rotgipfler / Zierfandler. And so it might look like this is kind of a synonym for one grape varietal, and it is not. So when you see next time Rotgipfler, Grüner Veltliner, think of Rotgipfler, and when you see next time Riesling, think of Zierfandler. And this is kind of the differentiation. I think it's which you can work easily, your way through this region really in the white wines. All right, I think it's time to head on to the red wines in our area, and Heinrich will give you this information.
Thank you, Bernhard. So, thank you, Bernhard. I'm sure he is one of the best in our region who can introduce and introduce you into our growing region, the history, and our special varieties. So, welcome from my side. So, I already have been introduced. My name is Heinrich Hartl. I'm also a winemaker. I'm coming from a winery what is run by my family since 7 generations. I think nearly the same long history, or even a longer history than in family Stadlmann, where Bernhard comes from. It's actually very special that the Austrian Wine Marketing Board decided that you visit our growing region first. It is exciting to see that of about 50% of you haven't been to Austria, and it's the first time. That makes me very proud that you made the decision to come over and to take your time and to visit Austria and get more knowledge about Austrian wine growing and our regions. Like Sabine already told you about the history and the position of Austria on the world wine map, let's say. We are very tiny, but I think it's unbelievable what kind of products, what kind of wines are coming out of this country. And then looking to our growing region, I mean, we are talking about 80 hectares of Zierfandler and 120 hectares of Rotgipfler. that are very, very tiny amounts. But if you work in your market and you want to have a special wine list where you come from, then you have to have also these white wines on your wine list in your country. That is definitely necessary. That was the reason why Bernhard said at the beginning, it might be the most important visit what you're doing now in the morning here in our growing region. So I have to talk about the red wine varieties, which are main varieties for our where we are focusing on. So that is Pinot Noir and St. Laurent. So it makes it a little bit easier maybe to talk about Pinot Noir, because most of you will have tasted Pinot Noir already somewhere at some time, but it should be very interesting for you to taste our Pinot Noirs from our growing region. So it is more common than Rotgipfler and Zierfandler. You know, it is a natural crossing also out of Traminer and Pinot Meunier. How the grape like? It's more a smaller grape, small bunches. It also needs very special conditions for growing it on the location where you plant it. And it's actually great that we have the possibility to be at that place to present Pinot Noir from the Thermenregion, because like also Bernhard already said, in the year 1141, this place was founded from monks from Burgundy. And there cannot be a better place to present Pinot Noirs out of our region than to be here in Freigut-Tallern. Thanks a lot to Erich Polz and his team to have the possibility to be here and to present our region. I think there are more or less 4 growing regions all over the world, or countries where Pinot Noir can be grown on a certain high quality level. Of course, there's Burgundy. I would say there's Germany, there is New Zealand, and there is Austria. Of course, there's also America, Oregon. Don't forget about this. So these are the 4. We are the 5th. We are working on that. In Austria, we have also a small growing area where we plant this variety. Like you have seen, the main Austrian red wine variety is Zweigelt. You will taste a couple or a lot of Zweigelt in the next days, and Blaufränkisch. And here in our growing region, by the reds, we are focusing on Pinot Noir. Also in my winery, it is the most important red wine variety. I'm from the village Oberwaltersdorf, so 3 of the 4 Pinot Noirs what we have, or what you have in the glass now, is from the stone fields, so from the flatter area here from our growing region of about 10 kilometers away where we are now. And one, that is the first one, is from the slopes here in Kumpelskirchen or Traiskirchen and Pfaffstetten. That is from the winery Piriwe. Like you know, Pinot Noir is also a red wine variety what you will not find in thousands of hectares everywhere on the world. What is the reason therefore? It needs special growing conditions. And I think Bernhard introduced you quite long into our climate. So we have the Pannonic climate from the east, and we have this influence of the continental climate from the western parts. And that makes it possible for us to grow this variety and getting great results out of it. And of course also we have very similar or good soil conditions for planting Pinot Noir and having this high content of chalk, so limestone, shingle, and that helps to get out quite high quality level. Of course, like also Sabine has been talking at the beginning, what is the story for the future about climate change? What's going on? So she showed you already that the average temperature is more than 2 degrees plus, that we harvest as early as never before. And what is quite special for me as well, 2016, most of the wines you have in the glass now, I think all of them, no, one is from 2015, are from the vintage 2016. 2016 was the year where we had late frost, massive late frost in Austria and also in our growing region. So these new situations we are living in and we have to fight against, and we will see what the future will bring. Since that time we are lucky that we did not have late frost with that big damage again, but 2016 it was a real drama. And actually small amounts of all these wines are produced because of this weather situation. So I got the impression before, after you start to taste the wine, there was a lot of interest and discussion. So I will let you with the wines. I got some information from the producers how the wines are made. I agree to the mister in the left corner from my side. It was also for me very interesting to see the different styles on all the white wines. And there is the question mark, where is the line of the varieties, or is it the personality of the winemakers? So from my point of view, knowing the producers, especially by the white wines, I would say every producer is a strong personality and has his own philosophy. And like Bernhard said, especially by these varieties, you really can work out the handwriting of and the philosophy of the winemaker. And that is one of the reasons why these wines show such individual characters. It will be very interesting to see the Pinot Noirs and the St. Laurents next to each other. Like I said, when I talked to the producers, it was interesting to hear how they treated the different wines, and it will be very interesting to see these wines next to each other. And if we can find here more a line, or they are also quite different, to see them next to each other.
The Pinot Noir is only made in this region, or?
No, you will also find it in other regions, but mainly. I mean, you find it in Burgenland, there's the village Gols around there, quite a few producers. You find it also in Carnuntum, which is a second more on red wine focused growing region here in Lower Austria, next to the border to Burgenland, but they are also actually focused on Zweigelt, but some producers also have Pinot Noir. And you find it a little bit also in Kamptal, in Kremstal, where you will be today in the afternoon. So you will visit Schloss Gobelsburg. They have a quite outstanding Pinot Noir as well, but mainly here in our growing region. Yeah.
Are Pinot Noirs becoming the next big thing for Austria?
The growing area is slightly increasing on Pinot Noir. But of course, it is a very difficult variety to treat, and that is the reason why it will always be and stay as a variety for specialists and for winemaker who really have love for this variety and being enthusiastic and not being mainstream. Like maybe Zweigelt is much easier to treat and easier to handle. And even, of course, for the customer, you have to have the entry point to kind of understand Pinot Noir or fall in love with Pinot Noir. But if you fall in love, then it happens.
I have read a couple of articles, and one of them was Jancis Robinson writing that Austrians are making better Pinot Noirs than Burgundians.
We're working on that. Thank you. Can you send me the article? That's a new information, but great.
But is it? Are these being exported now? The Canadian market would be having it, or?
Yes, I don't know on the Canadian. So our wines are available on the US. So there's the colleague Johanneshof Reinisch. Is your wine on the Canadian market? Your Pinot Noir? Not yet. Maybe tomorrow.
And it really works well with Rieslings and Bruners. But we just want to jump into the Pinot Noirs and Saint Laurents and stuff like that.
From my point of view and from my experience, so our wineries are quite focused on export in the last years, and in all the markets we are working with, we are very successful with our Pinot Noirs, and like Hannes said, also with the entering level, because of what also Sabine said at the beginning, the price value. So you're getting great wines in between 5 to 8 euros, or she even said 3 to 5. I would say 5 to 8 euros in the entering quality level. And there is actually the position, because of course Austria is not, I would say, is not that famous yet for great Pinot Noir, because we are so tiny and we have such a small production. But if you can offer on your market a great Pinot Noir for a great value, then of course people will be open to put it on their list and offer it in the restaurants or to their customers. That's how it works. What my impression is in the last years, yeah. And even what I know, Hannes is exporting quite a lot to the Netherlands, also from his entering Pinot Noir, and yeah. So
India has a Pinot Noir, but from Burgundy, not from.
Okay.
Burgundy,
Yeah.
not from
Yeah, yeah, you have to work on that. So, yeah, that's why you are here today, you know.
Question regarding production. Are these all like destemmed? I'm not getting any of that whole cluster kind of.
Yeah, so there is one wine with 10% of whole cluster. It is from the second one, yeah. So Hannes told me that 100% whole berries plus 10% of clusters. So to talk about the vinification, 3 of them are with spontaneous fermentation. So the first 3, the 4th is with selected yeast. The first 3 are fermented in open fermenter. The second one is fermented in wooden open fermented, pushed down by hand. The 4th is done by pump over. It's in stainless steel, and it is done by pump over. And it also starts, the 4th one starts fermentation, malolactic fermentation in tank and goes to barrel later on. And the other one goes straight after fermentation to the barrels and start natural malolactic fermentation in the barrels. We have been talking about this award-winning young woman with 22 years last night. It's the 4th wine out of her winery, what we have been talking about in the morning. Yeah, it's from Schwertführer, from vintage. Comparing the vintages, 2015 was different to 2016. 2016, a cooler year. For the reason of the late frost, the plants really had a shock after the frost, end of April. So more or less 2 weeks, nothing was going on in the vineyards. And we lost this time to the end of the year to starting the harvest. 2015 was different. It was a hot, dry year. So in the village where I come from, we have very poor soils and with very low possibility to hold the water, the humidity. So we had to irrigate. We have drop irrigation, and we had to irrigate 4 times with small portions to help the wines to survive in the year 2015. 2015 we had small quantity, quite high ripeness, and also quite high sugar levels. Yeah, so that's quite a difference in the vintages. The storage in the barrels. So Holzspur was for around 14 months in barrels, around 70% new barrels. Our Pinot Noir was 18 months in barrels, 1/3 new barrels, 1/3 second filling, 1/3 third filling. And Schwertführer was 2/3 in new barrels for 12 months, and the rest was second filling.
To your opinion, 16 is a poor vintage, yes?
Yes. Yeah.
What kind of yield are you talking about?
So from my winery, we are talking in between 3,500 to 4,500 kilograms per hectare. So 0.7, so around 3,000 to 3,500, 4,000 liters per hectare. Yeah. Our growing region is the growing region with the lowest average yields every year in Austria. So in the year 2017, we had an average from 4,200 liters average every winery in the region. The average all over Austria in that year was more than 6,500. And even last year, where we had a huge vintage, we have been under 6,000 or 5,600 liters in average. Yeah. So you will, the highest, to be honest, in here, I don't know if the colleagues will tell you it should not be Anyway, so the highest yields that is out of the statistic is always in the Wachau. Yeah. They have, in average, the statistic says they always have the highest yields.
Is it naturally low in yield, or is it something you manage?
We have the varieties which are natural low on the yields, and we have the dryness. So we have poor soils, we have the dryness, and we are also focusing on to hold the yields quite low. So our philosophy in our region, you will not really find our wines on the shelves in supermarkets in the entering price level. You will find a few Rotgipfler in the supermarkets because we cannot avoid to deliver for that prices with the economic production out of our wineries. With this low yields what we have and this big effort what we have to do in the vineyards to get this high quality level.
Could you indicate the retail pricing for this Pinot Noir, for example?
Hannes, was kostet euer?
40 euros in Austria at the shelf.
40? 40 on the shelf, yeah. The second one from Johanneshof. The first one, you have it in the Vinothek downstairs, around 20, I would say, Erich, yeah? 20 euros. Our one is 17.5 for private customers. And Schwertführer, I would say also around 16, 17 euros for private customers. So still the range, like also Sabine was telling you in the morning, top wines around 20 euros, not higher than 30, kind of 30 euros. Yeah, very representative. What do you think about the style? You can find similarity or in between the wines, or are they totally different? Is it different to the white wine varieties? What is your impression?
It's a problem with ripening because it's really green, and
yeah.
Winemaker would hide this greenness, maybe.
So you mean the influence of the wood, yes, that it's too high wood amount. It maybe also helps a little bit with aging.
Not so juicy. I need juiceness. No juiceness, really.
That
no
was
freshness.
16. That was 16. So for it's more a cooler and kind of elegant and not the full-bodied year in vintage. Yeah.
I think the work with the 10% whole bunch fermentation really shows quite well among the plants. Actually, it shows more in-depth in terms of flavor and in terms of flavor potential as well. I think it works quite well in this region.
Yeah. Yeah.
Instead of the open top one, I think it's a simple, easy, juicy drinking one, but actually not that one that can be aged well.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah.
Is it possible to know the age of this bean?
Yes, I forgot about this. Yeah. So from Piriwe, they are 30 years old. Johanneshof, they are 40 years old. Our ones are 20 years old. And Schwertführer, one part was planted 1994, so they are 25 years, and one part is planted 1998, he said. So it's a little bit more than 22 years. Okay. Yeah. So the oldest, the pioneer in the region was Johanneshof, so they have quite old wines. And yeah. So still a lot of replanting going on, and we are getting in the age of 20, 30 years of these varieties. So we will also see this with the St. Laurent Most of the wines, what we taste next, are around 30 years old. Yeah, but even there are wines out of this variety which are up to 60 years. Yeah.
For the vintage, we're tasting 16 today, but what is your perception on the 17 and 18? Which is, I mean, from your wine, would that be tasting brighter or more red fruit style? Because I mean, it looks as though this is from a cool climate, which is not particularly suitable for red grape. And then I'm sure that 17, 18 I mean, is that true? That almost like your wine performs, which supposedly should show better.
Yeah. From my point of view and my experience, yes, 17, 18. It was 18 was. We start picking as early as never before in the history of Austrian wine growing. So some regions, or even in our region, we start middle or end of August picking the grapes. So it was a different year again, but tasting the wines now, if you treat them the right way, you could work out the positive compounds of this vintage. And I just did it 3 days ago, that I taste all the different Pinot Noir barrels blind in the laboratory, and I was really, really happy to see what comes out from 2018 after getting in this quite highly ripe grapes, not totally overripe, but lower acidic levels, of course, and then we really had to think about how we should treat these grapes, especially because the grapes came in so warm. There was not even one night under 13 degrees, or some of them have been up to 15, 16 degrees Celsius during the vintage. Normally we already have nights with 7, 8 degrees Celsius, and that really helps for the flavors and getting in the grapes cool. Especially I like normally to make a cold maceration on the natural way, so pick early in the morning, getting in the grapes cool, and leave them without fermentation for a couple of days, and that was not really possible 2018. 17 was perfect, so I would say 17 and 18 actually great years and great vintages for Pinot Noir in Austria. And 16 is actually out of the line. 16 is out of the line. But that's what's on the market now, more or less. Good. St. Laurent. That is a variety what you will not know that well like Pinot Noir. It is also a Burgundian variety. It's a crossing out of Pinot Noir, and the second variety is not known anymore. So it's always said Pinot Noir is the female part and the male part disappeared. Sometimes happens. So from the genetic, it's not possible to find the genetic somewhere else for some reason. What's the difference? So a little bit bigger quantity is planted in our region, so it's around 150 hectares. So that is in total 20% what growing area of Austria is planted in our region. Yeah, it has a long history. Back to 1863. At that time, it was first named in Austria. It came to Austria through Professor Bronner. There are different meanings by the name. It is not coming, Bernhard told you at the beginning, in the past the names of the varieties often have been by the villages or the regions they come from, like Pinot Blanc and Pinot Noir and so on, or the Weißgipfler, Rotgipfler, because if you look through the vineyard you see the white tops or the red tops. St. Laurent, there is in France a village in Bordeaux which is called very similar, but the variety is not coming from there. It's coming from Alsace through Baden-Württemberg to our region, and it was named first 1863 here in Austria, and since that time it has a history in Austria, and especially in our growing region. So we have, next to the Cisterciens monks here in Gumbolskirchen, in Tattendorf, Chorherrenstift Klosterneuburg. You will also visit them in 2 days, I think. And there is the largest and biggest St. Laurent vineyard all over the world. So there are around 50 hectares planted. And you will taste these wines also in I think it's in 2 days you visit them. And that, of course, involves also the wine growers, the farmers or the small wine growers in Tattendorf and in these villages, and they also start to plant this variety on their fields. And since that time, we are very successful with this variety. It is flowering quite early. We have it can happen that the flowering not take place in the right way. It has also very low yields, so that's a phenomenon that some year you have good yield on a plant, and the next year you have nearly no grape on the plant. That makes it quite special, and again, that is one of the reasons why it is not planted all over Austria, all over the world, because it's not easy to run. It needs very poor soils, that is very important. It loves limestone again, so it needs calcareous soils, and it should not be too vigorous because the variety by itself is very vigorous, and it would be out of balance if it is on a soil which has too much power in. The ripening is a little bit later than Pinot Noir. The problem on the variety is that the grapes are very tight, the bunches, and the berries easily split, and the botrytis take place. And yeah, the positive thing, you never get these high sugar levels. So compared to the Pinot Noir, like Johannes said, in the last years there can be the problem with too much sun or with a lot of sun, a very high sugar level in the grapes. St. Laurent stops at a certain level for a natural alcohol potential around 13, and that's actually in times we are living in a good thing that this natural border exists by this variety. You also always have a little bit a higher acidity level, and you have more structured wines compared to the Pinot Noir. It always has the more grain tannins and always the darker flavors. It's going also the color is darker. That's typical and natural for this variety.
Wines seem to have a bit more cohesion than some of the previous flights. They all seem to have a very consistent style, especially with some carbonic maceration or semi-carbonic maceration. When did that enter into the region? Is that kind of the way that St. Laurent has always been made? Was that a development after 85 of trying to make fresher, fruitier wines that represented the region? How did that kind of decision get made so widely and evenly in deciding what Thermenregion and St. Laurent would be? I would say that the style, of course, in 85, I would not say that I have not been bored at that time, but I was not really in the wine business, but I'm sure that it changed the style completely. So the style we are tasting now in the glass, I would say is since the 2000 or after that, after getting more knowledge, after having hot and warm and dry years like the 2000, 2003, 2005. And like you said, they are treated very similar. They are, on the one hand, they are all from one village. Yeah, all of this producer is from another village. His winery is located in another village, but the grapes are coming also from Tattendorf. And yeah, the others are all from the same village, more or less the same soil.
And what I heard talking to the colleagues, they treated them the same way. So totally right. So the fruit by most of them, I didn't talk to Stefan. He said he will be here and he can answer the questions. But the other three, so the fruit was not crushed, just destemmed. But of course, by pumping the berries, they also have been a little bit, or some of them crushed. Then all of them are made by natural fermentation, punched down, and they are all around 2 weeks to 18 days on skins. Yeah. No bunches. Nobody has bunches, especially maybe. Yeah. Okay. Stefan does. Maybe Stefan, you can say something to the second wine that's out of. And Georg is also here. So Schneider Georg is here as well. You can also say something to your wine.
Yeah. So regarding the best of 2016, that's from my winery. Was my first vintage at home making wine. For me, St. Laurent is always somewhere aromatic and flavor-wise between cool climate Syrah and Pinot. So for me, the approach was 25% whole cluster, and additionally to that, I topped up the tank with just destemmed berries, not crushed, but also not pumped. After that, I wait for like 3 to 4 days until it slowly kicks off. At once stop it a little bit for 10 days. I press it off, go a little bit sweeter to barrel, and after that, it just either does mellow or doesn't. Usually it does, and we're looking about 25 to 30% new oak.
Thank you, Georg.
Yeah, we are focusing in our region as well as in our winery, and especially Pinot Noir and St. Laurent. And what we are looking for is to find the differences between the two grape varieties. So if you take a look at the Pinot Noir, you recognize it's more these red flavors that reminds you on strawberry, red cherries, maybe some blood orange or floral aromas like roses. And it's more the elegant and well balanced. And for St. Laurent, what we're looking for is, first of all, the color is more intensive, and the flavor profile is more this dark fruit. So that reminds you on blackberry, sour sherry, blueberry, for example. And if you taste, you recognize the acidity is a bit higher, and even the tannins are a bit stronger than Pinot Noir. The way how we made St. Laurent is, let's say, a traditional way. So we are working organically, harvested by hand, with stemming, but whole berries. Natural fermentation with plunging down. Maturation time is around 18 days. Malolactic happens in the barrel, and out of the barrel we pump the wine after 12 months.
What's also different for me, the fourth wine is quite different in the nose, I would say, from my point of view. I don't want to influence you. And the information I got from the colleague is this one is 100% new oak. 100% new oak.
And where do these wines go? Are they mostly drunk within the region? Are they mostly drunk within Austria?
I would say most is drunk in Austria. So the last one, definitely. Your one?
Actually, mine goes more into export, to be honest.
Okay.
So 90% of my St. Laurent production is actually going abroad.
Okay. Georg?
40% about this is exported. St. Laurent, especially to Switzerland, United States, Russia.
And I would say our will be most on the Austrian market, in Germany maybe. Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Tell us about DAC. Do you wait in it, and what do you expect of it?
Pardon? Once more?
DAC.
Yeah.
Do you waiting for DAC?
You can. I don't understand the question even. Yeah, the world is waiting for a DAC from the Thermenregion. Yeah, so we are thinking about the strategy for the future. Good Ding braucht Weile. There's a German meaning. I will pass over to my colleague. I'm part of the board, but we are in a process, I would say. We are in a process. So many things are going on in the Austrian wine business at the moment. So I think, a couple of more days, and then there will also be information from the Thermenregion about the DAC. Yeah. On the one hand side, of course, the varieties are actually on the hand. You see what we presented today. I would say what starts in the last couple of months in Austria in the DSA system is more starting in Styria, making these 3 levels with a lot of different varieties, and even having Wachau. They also want to have 17 different varieties in there. Wagram. So the whole philosophy, strategy behind the system, like Weinviertel started, is now confused, I would say. And now maybe Austria in total has to think about the system. Maybe, I don't know. It's not up to me. But that is also one of the reasons where the question mark is at the moment for our growing region. In what direction should we go, or what strategy is actually the way we should keep on. Yeah. Further questions? No? Then I will pass over to the Austrian Wine Marketing Board again.
Thank you so much, Bernhard and Heinrich, and to all of the winemakers who were present on the day. As I mentioned, this is a super deep dive into this region, so do be sure to check out all of the wines that we tasted, which are all listed below. And I've also included details below of the full program and maps of the Thermenregion. And while you're at it, if you haven't already, do be sure to subscribe to the Interpreting Wine podcast by heading over to interpretingwine.com/listen. Next time on the podcast, in episode 358, we continue our journey down the Danube on the Austrian Wine Summit as we head to the region of Traiskirchener. See you then.